Welcome to our Impact series, sponsored by Live and Well Communities and the St. Louis Regional Health Commission. We're excited to be broadcasting to you in the Boot Heel, Kansas City, and St. Louis, and we welcome you from wherever you may be joining us. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. Welcome to our Impact Series, Holiday Hardships, presented by Alive and Well Communities and the St. Louis Regional Health Commission. We're excited that you're joining us from one of our geographies in Kansas City, the Boot Heel, or even in St. Louis, or wherever else you may be joining us as we engage in this important discussion. Now, we know the holidays can be a really joyous time, but we also have to acknowledge that for many in our community, the holidays may be a time of hurting, may be a time of hardship. And so, as we move the holidays to being a time of healing, recognizing that this is an important conversation to have. Now, as we're engaging in this conversation, recognize that as our communities may be experiencing hurt during this time of joy, recognizing that as we work to get to zero health disparities, we have to ensure that our communities are whole, healing, and healthy as we work to get to zero health disparities. So we're excited that you're joining us for this very important conversation. Now, because we want this to be a dialogue, not just between our communities, but all of us engaging in conversation, we're going to encourage you to ask your questions as we move throughout our time together. And on your screen, you will see an option to submit questions. And we hope that you scan the QR code and submit any questions that you may have during this time together. Now, at any point, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, those will be answered in real time. All you need to do is scan the QR code and submit your questions, and we'll make sure to integrate those into our discussion. Now, don't worry, we'll put up this QR code several times throughout our time together. And because we know the holidays, even under joyous circumstances, can be stressful, we want to just take a moment to pause and center ourselves before we engage in the conversation that can be fairly heavy. So wherever you may be, whether you're joining us from your home or from one of our sites across the state, we're going to ask you to just stand still. Allow yourself to have a moment of peace. Take an opportunity to breathe in through your nose. Slowly and in a controlled manner, breathe out through your mouth. And keep repeating this cycle, just taking the time to intentionally and purposefully breathe. In this very moment, there are no other expectations of you. Just take a moment to breathe. And as you're breathing, allow your body to find its own natural rhythm. Breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Find your body's natural rhythm and just breathe. Recognizing that while the holidays can be a very joyous time, also honoring and acknowledging that stress can come with that joy as well. And so just intentionally taking a moment to pause and breathe. Now, as we noted, even though we may be coming to our sites and to your computer screen remotely, we want this to be an interactive process and encouraging you to engage with the dialogue. And so, any questions that you may have, we welcome you to submit. And you can submit those either scanning the QR code that's there on your screen or going to www.minty.com. And as you're on that page, putting in the code 5331 8026. That's 5331 8026. And we'll be sure to put up the slide several times to allow you the opportunity to engage in this content. And I see that several of you are already responding with just a thumbs up. So with the holidays, we want to recognize that for some people, even if the holidays themselves don't bring hardship, that for others in our community, this may be a time in their lives where they're experiencing many firsts. Maybe the first time without a loved one, the first time engaging in a new or different tradition, the first time having to reconcile some sort of loss or hurt we experienced throughout the year. And recognizing that for many in our community, while happiness may be surrounding us, there's also potentially a conflicting emotion of loss or even grief that we may be dealing with concurrently. And so I want you to take a moment to just recognize and honor, reflecting back on 2023, and think for a moment, what have you experienced this year that may impact how you're going to engage in the holidays this year? I can share for myself, recognizing that this year, as we engage in our family traditions, they're going to be a little bit different. They're going to be outside of my control. There are going to be some unknowns. And thinking about how that may impact how you show up over the holiday season. Now, I want you to also imagine during this time, what has your community experienced in the past year that may make this holiday season feel a little bit different? Maybe there was a natural disaster your community experienced. Recognizing then that for some of our families, how they get to enjoy the holidays will look and feel very different. Maybe there was some economic turmoil in your community. And what does that mean for the experience we get to share with our families during this season? And maybe in your community, there were other factors of community trauma that may impact how our families get to enjoy and celebrate during this season. So thinking about all that means. Now, as we think about being healthy and whole, we want to recognize and honor the losses that individuals and our communities have experienced, while also really creating pathways for healing and wholeness. And wanting to understand what that means, as we hope that the holidays are a joyous time for not just each and every single one of us tuned in, but for our entire communities as we work to achieve zero health disparities. So as we change slides here, and work with technology, you should see a tree on your screen. Now, if you've been to one of our mini trainings for the Regional Health Commission or for Alive and Well communities, seeing an image of a tree is something you're accustomed to, especially as we think about the pair of ACEs and how our individual trauma intersects with our experience of community trauma. But during this holiday season, as we think about navigating those holiday hardships, the harm, and as we really work to promote healing in whole communities, wanting to think about what can we do during this time to support those who may be experiencing those hardships, whether it's us as individuals, our families, or communities as a whole. So as you look at this tree, I want you to think about during this holiday season, during the season, so during the holiday season, we want to think about what do we intentionally plant in our soil to create whole communities, honoring the experiences of individuals and families, neighbors, siblings, loved ones, and thinking about what is it we can intentionally do during this time. I apologize for that technological glitch. So now that we've got that sorted out, thinking about what we intentionally plant in the soil to create whole and healthy communities as we work to achieving zero health disparities. If you're joining us as part of this event already, you're taking the time and space to acknowledge that for some individuals, the holidays are already hard. And recognizing that as a part of this opportunity, we've encouraged you all in our various geographies to help to ensure that we intentionally plant hope and happiness by making opportunities available to donating to one of our partner organizations for families and individuals, as well as our neighbors who may be experiencing hardship during this time. And recognizing that being intentional about the things that we plant in the soil to create wholeness and healing is going to be very important. So, not just what you can give, but what is it that you can do, even in your own household and in your own community? How is it that in your own household during these times, we make intentional space to process and honor any hurt or losses we've experienced? How is it that in naming them and holding space for them, we create the opportunity and honor those losses while really developing a path forward on that journey of healing and recognizing that healing is a journey? Thinking about in our communities, whether we're at work, in a place of worship, at a holiday gathering, thinking about how is it that we make intentional space that while some may be enjoying themselves, that we honor that others may be experiencing those hardships. And wanting to name that sometimes those hardships are visible and known, and sometimes those hardships we may internalize and we don't talk about for any number of reasons. But when we as individuals create space for any losses that our fellow community members may have experienced, how we create space for them as a person and the opportunity for them to find wholeness and healing. So I want you to reflect just for a moment back on that initial prompt of what are those losses that you may have experienced, whether they're losses that others know about, or maybe losses that you've internalized and not taken the opportunity to speak aloud. And as you're reflecting on those, thinking about how you're creating space for yourself and what you may need from others during this time where you're experiencing hardship, to feel included, to feel whole, to feel like you can partake in the season. Now I see a few questions coming in, and I want to take a brief moment to honor those questions and comments. And one of the questions is, what if I haven't taken the opportunity to share with people the way I've been hurting, and I've just been putting on a brave face? And I think that's an important question to ask, recognizing that sometimes during the holidays, we may feel like a burden to others during a time where people are experiencing joy. And we may feel that if we share the heaviness that we may be experiencing or the loss and naming it, that we may really dampen other people's joy. So I want you to just think about, what is it first and foremost to name for yourself when you're feeling that heaviness? Setting healthy boundaries of what is it that you want to interact with. Do you need to be at every holiday gathering? Is that really what's best for you? Thinking about when you're in those spaces or at those gatherings, whether it's at work, at a place of worship, somewhere else in the community. Are there people in your realm that you can reach out to and share that it seems like I'm putting on a brave face, but I am experiencing that hurt and heaviness. And I think that you'll find, not only in naming that for yourself, but in reaching out, that you have a far greater community that wants to support you, a far greater community that wants to see you achieve wholeness and healthiness, and a far greater community that wants you to thrive. In addition to that, I would also acknowledge that even though people may be putting on a brave face, sometimes it's just that, a brave face. And so when we can take those opportunities to just check in with our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our fellow community members, and just creating intentional space for them, how important that is as we understand when individuals are whole individuals help to build a healthy community. So as we see, I see some more questions coming in, and please bring them in as we think about wanting to support our communities and ourselves during this time. I'm going to take just a quick moment to read these questions that come in. And one of the questions is also great. Actually, all of the questions are great. I'm just reading this first one here, and this is a really phenomenal question. And I think this is one that many of us have at the top of our minds and top of our hearts, especially as we think about wanting to intentionally make space for those who have experienced that grief or loss. And we know that the holidays may be a little bit different from those in the past. And the question is, how is it I can support others when I don't know quite what to say, and even if I don't have a solution? And I think sometimes as humans, we want to fix, and fixing is phenomenal. But recognizing sometimes with the losses that we experience, we shouldn't try to offer a quick fix. In fact, sometimes trying to offer a quick fix can almost feel invalidating to the person who's feeling the hurt, who's feeling the loss, who's feeling that weight of heaviness during the holidays. So I would encourage you, rather than thinking about trying to jump to a solution, even though that feels like what we want to do, because we're fixers, thinking about how do we just hold space for people? How do we just be present with people? And how do we just genuinely listen? The reality is in many cases, we're not going to be able to fix the underlying issue. But when I know that I'm seen, that I matter, that I take up space, that I'm important to someone else, that burden feels lighter. And then I feel more whole as an individual. So I'm going to encourage you that when you hear about these hardships, that sometimes we may not have a fix, and not to immediately jump to trying to fix, but think about how can you just hold space, and in that moment, let that person know you see them, you hear them, and they matter. And when we hold that space, we build bridges, we're more connected, and we're less isolated. And that's what healing is about, is in being less isolated and knowing that I matter and that I have those supports. Thank you for your question. Another question we have in here is, how can I take care of myself during this difficult season? One of the things I want to acknowledge is that sometimes during this season, it seems almost like there are a lot of expectations that we need to be at different gatherings, that we need to show up a certain way, need to have a certain energy. So, one of the suggestions I would say is think about what you need in terms of boundaries, because maybe what you need is to limit the number of interactions. Now, let me be clear, that doesn't mean that you should isolate yourself. But if you feel that you're just putting on that big smile and you're putting on that big personality and that guise of happiness, recognizing that sometimes that can be more harmful to ourselves. So, do we need to be at every gathering? Thinking about what is it that you need to take care of yourself, not just reactively after those spaces or after you feel that heaviness, but thinking about what can you do proactively to take care of yourself. Maybe those are the days that you show yourself a little extra love. Those are the days you create new traditions for yourself. Those are the days where maybe beforehand you reach out to a friend. If you find that your faith is a sort of source of strength, maybe reaching out to someone in your faith community, saying a prayer, reading a proverb. Maybe it's a time where you carve out additional space to allow yourself the opportunity to do something just for you. For instance, I know that many of you out there have many great gifts and talents. Maybe you're artistic, and you need to find that time to allow your creative energies to really just have an opportunity to shine, even if just for you. So thinking about what is it you can do proactively if you know that this is a heavy season for you, as well as reactively. And again, recognizing setting boundaries is important, but ensuring that in setting those boundaries, you're not isolating yourself. Sometimes when we feel that heaviness, we may be inclined to want to isolate. And if you're that introverted person, you need those periods of introspection and time with yourself. But wanting to recognize that there's that line between introspection and isolation. And sometimes in isolation, what we can find is that weight doesn't just diminish of those holiday hardships we're experiencing. But what can actually happen is in isolation, those hardships and that weight we are experiencing can actually feel like it's magnifying, like it's growing. And so recognizing that connectedness is important. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to go to all of those gatherings where there are going to be lots and lots of people. But how do you connect to your village, your support system, and the people that you know are there for you and that want to see you thriving, and creating those intentional opportunities during this time? So if you're going to take care of yourself, and please take care of yourself, ensuring that you're creating that intentional space for you, especially during this season. And also, to be very honest, beyond this season as well. How do I communicate my boundaries with loved ones, especially during this season of lots of gatherings? And that's a really great question. And sometimes it feels like with the people we love, establishing boundaries is even harder to do than in other spaces. So, one of the things I suggest always is recognizing and knowing your boundaries. And as you know and understand your boundaries, rather than communicating when those boundaries are about to be crossed by others, how do you proactively communicate your boundaries? Maybe a boundary you're going to set this holiday season as an expectation is as we have this time of togetherness, we're not going to talk politics so we can make sure that we can enjoy one another. And when I communicate those boundaries up front and proactively, it's easier than to go back and say, just like we talked about, we're not going to go there in an effort to ensure that we can have that connectedness during this time. So think about what those boundaries are and how you're going to communicate those to people proactively. Now, sometimes what I find is that we may be in a space and we didn't even think about that. Oh, wow, we're getting into heavy territory. Like it feels like I'm not being seen, heard, or validated. And so sometimes there are boundaries we need to establish that we didn't even recognize we needed right away. And so taking a moment to just pause and name those. Again, as proactively as we can, it sets the tone for what your boundary is. And what we also find in many instances is when those boundaries are proactively set, you'll see that other people in the space are willing then to be advocates and say, well, this boundary was already set. This boundary was already set, and we want to honor that boundary. Now, I do want to recognize, I know sometimes it's hard to talk boundaries with loved ones. And I want you to think about this both and, not just thinking about the time with your loved ones, but also thinking about what you need for yourself. And so sometimes what setting a boundary may mean, if that boundary continuously gets crossed, is does it mean leaving early? Does it mean leaving the space? Does it mean taking a time out and calling a friend, a loved one, someone in your village or your support system? But recognizing if you find those boundaries are getting crossed, or that you're finding you're not able to verbalize your boundaries and your needs in that moment, taking a time out and knowing that that's okay and knowing that that's important. Now, I'm hoping you're noticing that with these questions, that there's a lot of love out there. And especially when we name that we're experiencing hurt, loss, and heaviness, that it's not just about covering it up and putting a big smile on our faces, but recognizing there are lots of people out there wanting to ensure that we're taken care of, wanting to make sure that we're able to partake, and also recognizing as you're one of those people wanting to be a support for those who may be experiencing hardships during the holidays. Recognizing and holding space for the fact that the holidays may not be as joyous for everyone. And so, how do we ensure that our entire communities have that opportunity for healing and wholeness? Now, if you're at your site, I want to be mindful that if you're in the Boot Heel or Kansas City or St. Louis, that there are other great activities as we think about connecting and being in community with one another during these holidays and holding space for community togetherness as we overcome and we address these hardships. So making the time and space for you to enjoy the rest of the event. But I also want to leave the link open and encourage you that if you have any more questions, we want to make sure to answer those. As we honor and recognize that we want our holidays to be joyous for all, and how we create space for that wholeness as we work together to achieve zero health disparities. That link will stay open. We'll send out responses and helpful tips during the holidays as a result of your questions that you send in. And we want to thank you for being a part of helping to build alive and well communities as we work towards achieving zero health disparities. Thank you for your time. If you're at one of our sites, we hope you enjoyed those activities. And for those of you who may be joining us remotely, hoping that you take the opportunity for yourself to feel whole this holiday season, and hoping that you can be a part of making for others, a very special holiday season. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you back soon for another